Today's video, we're going to be working on an AC. The problem we're having right now is the tenant is saying when they turn off their AC, the AC continues to run and the outside condensing unit and the blower motor inside will not shut off. See here, the thermostat is set to the off and the auto position. So here, we're at the return. This is where your filter goes. And I can hear the blower motor is actually running. At this point, you have to kind of understand the schematics in your mind. The thermostat sends the signal to the condensing unit or your contactor outside. When your thermostat sends a signal to turn on, it'll engage your contactor, and your contactor will tell the system to turn on and start running. And this is what powers or allows your condensing unit outside to turn on and off. So I see here it is off, it's in the auto. However, my condensing unit outside is running, my blower motor inside is running. So we're having some sort of problem as far as the signal from the thermostat to my contactor outside. You can see here the first thing that I did was I pulled the panel off of the thermostat. Once I pull the face off of my thermostat, that should disengage or kill any signal going to my condensing unit outside. At this point, we're here back at the thermostat. We're just checking the wiring, making sure the wiring is correct. So all my wires are wired correctly. A lot of times what may happen is if you have an inexperienced technician, when they're doing the wirings, they may not install it properly, or they may just have the wires touching. But here we see that there's not an issue. So right now we know that the issue is going to be most likely the contactor outside. For some reason, when the thermostat's sending the signal to turn on and off, what happens with the contactor is sometimes it'll just stay stuck in the on position. Here, I'm gonna put the face back on, and I'm gonna go back outside and see if I get power back to my condensing unit, even though it's on the off and auto position. You can see here, the unit is running even though the thermostat is off and in the auto position. So at this point, I'm pretty confident in advising that the issue is going to be with the contactor itself. First thing you want to do, obviously for safety precaution, is remove the disconnect from your condensing unit. Once you pull the disconnect, that should disengage the power to your condensing unit. Now we're going to remove the outside panel, and basically you have 4 screws. Loosen the top 2 ones and then remove the bottom. Now here, if you look, you can see that the actual contactor is in the engage position. So I do have the disconnect pulled, but the reason this thermostat is still in the engage position is because it most likely just got stuck in that position. And so right now, even though my thermostat is on the off and auto position, this should not be engaged. It should actually be depressed. So right now, we're going to start working on replacing this contactor. Here, this is the contactor replacement. And you can see here, when you push it in, it turns on when the signal is sent. And then when it's supposed to shut off, it should pop back up towards you. So right now we're going to replace this contactor to this condensing unit. Always ensure when you're working on electrical work that you do test for voltage. So here, this is my non-contact voltage detector. I'm going to push the disconnect back in just so you can see the non-contact voltage detector picking up voltage from the bottom of the contactor. Now, when I pull the disconnect, I shouldn't have any incoming power to my contactor. If you're unsure, you can always use your multimeter. Here, I have it set to the volts AC. And here we're going to test here at the bottom of the contactor power coming in. And I should have a reading of 240 volts. But you can see that I do not have any voltage. And that's because we pulled the disconnect. Here, if you look at the disconnect, when I take the power from my 2 lines coming in, it should have a reading of 240 volts. But because we pulled the fuse, we killed the power going to our contactor. This right here would be power coming in from my circuit breaker, and here we're going to test our two lines, and we should have 240 volts coming in. Now if I put my disconnect back in, that will send the 240 volts back to my contactor. Here I'm going to put my disconnect back in, and at my contactor I should get a reading of 240 volts coming in. We're going to pull the disconnect, and now we're going to start on removing the old contactor and installing the new one. Pretty much as far as wiring goes, obviously you have your two lines coming in. You want to remove those and reconnect those. Then here on the sides we have just two of our low voltage coming into our contactor. And then here we have two black leads, two yellow leads. The colors may differ or vary depending on your system, but you want to kind of take note where these wires are coming from. So I know this one's coming from my compressor, this one's coming from my fan motor, this one's coming from my compressor, this one's coming from my capacitor. Again, the colors may vary. You just might want to just take a picture, or even if you can, just kind of write down which one's coming from where, so that when you rewire it you don't have any issues. What I'm doing right now is I'm removing the screws that secure the contactor to the condensing unit. So here when I touch my contactor, it is super hot on the back side, which is telling me that this thing's just been running non-stop. So now what we're going to do is we're going to disconnect the wires, and then we're going to insert or reattach the new contactor and then rewire it. Here I removed the contactor, and you can see that it's still stuck in the engaged position. I'm gonna see if I can kind of mess with it and pull with it to see if I can kind of loosen that switch to show you what it should look like when there's no power going to it. Here you can see I was able to kind of mess around with it, and now it's no longer in the engaged position. And when you kind of look, you can see it's just really burnt up in the back, just all the rust, the buildup. So this is probably the original contactor that's been sitting here for 20 years. So we're going to go ahead and start installing the new one. So here I've attached my power coming in, and now I'm going to reset or reattach my contactor to the actual condensing unit and then start connecting the other wires. See here I've secured my contactor to the condensing unit. Here you can see on my old contactor, the way this went in was it secured to the top of the contactor through the screw, but here there's no way for me to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this wire, and then I'm just going to put the wire right inside of the terminal and tighten it down. See here I cut the tip, and now I'm going to insert it, and then I'm going to tighten it down. I'm going to do the same thing for this side. We're going to cut the tip, we're going to strip the wire, and then we're going to engage it and put it on the inside of the terminal. We cut the wire, we stripped it, and now we're going to put it in, and we're going to tighten the terminal. We're going to basically just put our leads on top. This is from the fan motor. This one is from the capacitor. Now the only wires we have left are going to be for our thermostat. The old contactor you see here, we had one wire up top, one on the bottom, but they were still on separate terminals. Basically on the new ones, what they've done, instead of having them both on one side, they put one on one side and one on the other. As you can see here, they have one on one side, one on the other. So all we're doing is we're connecting one to one side, one to the other. Right now, what we're going to do is we're just going to give it a nice tug on all the connections, make sure nothing comes loose. Right now, I could take a voltage reading. I shouldn't get any voltage coming in because my disconnect is unplugged. But once I plug my disconnect back in, I should get a reading here of 240 volts. Now, because my thermostat is in the off position, the contactor should not engage. The only time this contactor should engage is when I have the thermostat set to the on and auto position. So right now, we're going to plug the disconnect back in, and we're going to take a voltage reading here at the bottom. Here, my disconnect is in, and now we're going to take a voltage reading to make sure that we are getting 240 volts coming in. And you can see here we do have a reading of 240 volts. Now, if you wanted to test your system, you could simply push the contactor in. We do know the disconnect is plugged in. We have 240 volts coming in. We should be able to press the contactor and the condensing unit should turn on, because what you're doing by pressing the contactor and engaging it is you're tricking the system into thinking that the signal came from the thermostat. So go ahead, just be careful not to touch the voltage, obviously. So here, you see the fan motor turn on. You could hear the compressor turned on. And so now, once you remove it and disengage it, the system should turn off. So right now we're going to turn our thermostat on and we're going to see if our system functions properly. Here's our thermostat. It's in the off auto position. We're going to turn it to cool. Drop the temperature. We're at 74. The system should turn on. You heard it click. I hear my blower motor running upstairs. And now we're going to go outside and we're going to see if our condensing unit is running. You can see here my condensing unit is running. The fan motor is blowing. The condensing unit is operational. The compressor's on. So at this point, we know what the issue was, the contactor. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go inside. I'm going to turn it off. Just make sure that the system responds to the signal being sent from my thermostat. We're going to turn our thermostat to the off position. And now we're going to go outside, check the condensing unit, and we shouldn't have any power engaging that contactor. So you can see here that the condensing unit did turn off. If this video was a help, if it was informational, please subscribe.